So, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the Office of Public Records and the Office of the Secretary's Juneteenth program on Black economic empowerment and 250 years of American freedom. My name is Dr. Lopez Matthews Jr., and I am the State Archivist and Public Records Administrator for Washington, D.C., which means that I am the Director of the D.C. Office of Public Records and Archives. And I'm excited to have you all join us this evening for this great program. One of the things that we like to do at the Office of Public Records, in case you don't know, is promote topics that highlight DC history. We are the official repository for the records of the DC government. So we have birth records, death records, marriage records, wills, land records, architectural plans, records of DC government agencies, and so basically the history of the local government of Washington, D.C. Many people think we're tied to the National Archives, but we are not tied to the National Archives. We're actually just focused on the local history of Washington, D.C. And so I'm glad that you're here. We're joined by Bill Branch, who is our DC archivist. So he has been there for many years, supporting and promoting DC history. So I'm glad to see he is here. And without much further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker, Rodney A. Brooks. And Rodney A. Brooks writes on retirement and wealth and health inequities. His retirement columns appeared in U.S. News and World Report and AARP's Senior Planet. He has also written retirement columns for the Washington Post and USA Today, and is a contributor to National Geographic, Next Avenue, Forbes, and the Washington Post. He is the author of the book, The Rise and Fall of the Freedmen's Bank and Its Lasting Socioeconomic Impact on Black America. He is also the author of the book, Fixing the Racial Wealth Gap, Racism and Discrimination Put Us Here, but This is How We Can Save Future Generations. The book was a winner of the National Association of Black Journalists Outstanding Book Award in 2022, and also made the shortlist for the Society for Advancing Business Editing and Writing third annual Best in Business Book Awards. And he is a recipient of the President's Award from the National Association of Black Journalists. And he was elected to the NABJ Hall of Fame in 2021. And he was named the Senior Fellow at Prosperity Now 2022. And so I would like to thank Dr. Brooks for joining us. The 250 years, or celebrating 250 years of American history, should be inclusive of all Americans and tells a story of how America has come to where it is today. And so I'm so excited to welcome Mr. Brooks to speak about this great topic of Black economic empowerment and 250 years of American freedom. So over to you, Mr. Brooks.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you to Mayor Bowser, Mr. William Branch, and Dr. Matthews, and the DC government for inviting me to be a part of these Juneteenth celebrations. A couple of good friends, Michael Days and Angela Dodson, have written a new book called We've Been Here Before. And that's exactly how I felt in the last 18 months as this administration, with the help of the U.S. Supreme Court, the Senate, and House Republicans, have turned back the clock on any semblance of economic parity or equality for Black Americans. And I'm here to tell you today that we have been here before many times, okay? As political commentator Roland Martin, host of Roland Martin Unfiltered, often says, every time we Black Americans have experienced some level of progress, white America has found a way to stop that progress and push us back. They've done this for more than 150 years using legal, illegal, and often immoral means. They've used everything from angry white mobs, murder, trickery, theft, and even local, state, and federal laws. So, to be perfectly clear, local, state, and federal governments have been complicit in these setbacks. So, let's begin with a discussion of some of the glaring economic disparities between Blacks and whites in America. 72% of households own homes in America versus just 44% of black households. Okay, this striking 28 percentage point gap is wider than it was in 1960 and remains a primary driver of the broader racial wealth divides in the US. Between 2019 and 2022, total wealth increased for all racial and economic groups. However, median black wealth increased from $27,970 to $44,890. Um, Basically, we're continuing to lag other racial groups. The median wealth for white families was 285,000, which is more than six times black households. So let's add to these statistics that home ownership accounts for 45% of a homeowner's wealth. Only then can you fully appreciate how Black Americans have been consistently robbed of generational wealth since the Civil War. Black Americans lost millions of acres of property, hundreds of billions of dollars in wealth due to illegal seizures, discriminatory federal policies, and racially motivated violence. Black farmers lost 90% of the more than 16 million acres from that they owned from 1910 to 1997 through state-sanctioned violence and discriminatory structures that limited black wealth building. A conservative estimate of the value of lost black agricultural land is about 326 billion. So let's start this with 40 acres and a mule. Okay, we could start anywhere in history, but let's start this discussion with the Emancipation Proclamation in 1865. So, as you know, 40 acres and a mule refers to basically a wartime proclamation by Union General William Sherman, January 16th, 1865, during the Civil War, to allot land to some freed, formerly enslaved families in plots of land that were no larger than 40 acres. So some 400,000 acres of land in Georgia, South Carolina, and Florida were to be confiscated and divided into parcels for 18,000 formerly enslaved families. Some of that land distribution actually happened under the military, but after President Lincoln was assassinated, his successor, Andrew Johnson, who was one of the most racist presidents in the history of this nation, did everything he could to reverse this and other provisions in the Freedmen's Bureau bills. All of the confiscated land was returned to the former slave owners. Now, at about the same time, the Homestead Act of 1862 provided 160 acres of land free to white settlers in an attempt to speed the settlement of the West. Okay, these settlers only had to pay a small fee and live on the land for 5 years. So roughly 4 billion claims were filed over 30 states. Okay, that law benefited 1.6 million white families and only 6,000 black families. By 2017, the estimates were that about 93 million Americans were descendants of people who took advantage of the Homestead Act. And you're going to see we come back time and time again to homeowners and the disparity in home ownership. Okay, so let's go on and talk about the Freedmen's Savings Bank. As Lopez said, I wrote a book called The Rise and Fall of the Freedmen's Savings Bank and its lasting socioeconomic impact on Black Americans. Okay, that historic bank, sometimes called the nation's first black bank, was headquartered right here in Washington, D.C. Original building is gone, but the site is the U.S. Treasury Annex, which has been renamed the Freedmen's Bank Building, and it's at the corner of Madison Avenue and Pennsylvania Avenue Northwest. The Freedmen's Bank and Trust was established in 1865 by President Lincoln and the U.S. Congress, the same time they created the much better known Freedmen's Bureau, which was tasked with providing social education, financial assistance to hundreds of thousands of the newly freed slaves. The Freedmen's Savings Bank was established primarily to give Black Civil War veterans and soldiers who were flush with cash wages and signing bounties access to a bank to save and grow their money, something that was denied at white banking institutions. Okay. The Black soldiers, many of them former slaves who had never earned money of their own, also they needed a way to send money, send cash to their families. So the bank offered blacks, both slaves and freedmen, the opportunity to learn lessons about finances and money and training and banking jobs, none of which was available at white banking institutions. Um, it grew to 37 branches in 17 states, mostly in the South, but also in major cities in the North like New York, Philadelphia, and Washington, D.C. Well, the bank grew too fast, and eventually that early success was overtaken by incompetence, a world economic recession, and rampant corruption by the all-white, all-male board of directors of the institution. When they brought in Frederick Douglass to help, it was too late. And the bank collapsed. In 1874, Congress shut it down, and with it went the hopes, dreams, and savings of thousands of blacks. Okay, when the Freedmen's Bank closed, okay, the bank did much more than shatter the dreams of former slaves and freedmen. It left 61,144 depositors with losses of nearly $3 million. After years of waiting, some depositors recouped a portion, but most of the poorest received nothing. So that $3 million that was lost is $80 million in today's dollars, was lost by Civil War veterans, former slaves, free blacks. Um, and it wiped away what would have been a century and a half of generational wealth for black families, money that could have potentially been used to help blacks buy homes, property, that they could leave to their children, grandchildren, and future generations. So we only left to imagine the possibilities. If those millions lost by black depositors when the Freedmen's Bank shut down 150 years ago had been used to buy farms, homes, property, and education for their children and grandchildren, what those resources would have meant for black generational wealth. So now we're going to talk about Tulsa and basically the destruction of vibrant black communities, which also, okay, you will again see the comment thread, how it impacted our generational wealth. During the social justice protests, during the COVID epidemic, many more Americans, black and white, became aware of the atrocities that took place in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Following World War One, Tulsa was recognized nationally for its affluent African American community known as the Greenwood District. Thriving Black business district and surrounding residential area was referred to as Black Wall Street. In the early morning hours of June 1st, 1921, Greenwood was looted and burned by white rioters. Okay. The governor declared martial law, National Guard troops arrived. Guard the the guards, the guardsmen assisted firemen in putting out fires, but they took black folks out of the hands of the vigilantes and imprisoned all black Tulsans who were not already in jail. Over 6,000 people were held in the convention hall in the fairgrounds, some for as long as 8 days. Okay, these are the people who were victims, right? So 24 hours after the violence erupted, it ended, and 35 city blocks were laid in charred ruins. More than 800 people were treated for injuries, and historians believe as many as 300 people may have died. 10,000 black people were left homeless, and the cost of the property damage amounted to $1.5 million in real estate and three-quarters of a million dollars in personal property. Now that's equivalent to about 40 million in 2025 dollars. By the end of 1922, most of the homes were rebuilt, but the city insurance companies and real estate companies refused to compensate them. Now, the historical focus has been on Tulsa, but violent white mobs destroy vibrant black communities in dozens of other American cities, including north, south, west, east, including Philadelphia, Atlanta, Houston, Rosewood, Florida, New York, Charleston. Armed whites even overthrew a black elected government in Wilmington, North Carolina. The Equal Justice Initiative says it has documented at least 12 large-scale massacres in Louisiana, Alabama, Texas, Tennessee, Mississippi, and South Carolina between 1872 and 1876. So there is no estimate on how much was lost in these massacres, but it has been estimated that wealth in general and generational wealth that was lost in Tulsa alone was 200 to 600 billion dollars. In virtually all of these historical events, victims were denied insurance payouts, and neither state nor local governments provided any kind of reparations or meaningful restitution for decades. Then we're going to go move on to World War II and um, basically black veterans coming home from World War II, um, where they should have benefited from what was called the GI Bill. Okay, signed into law in June 1944, the Servicemen's Readjustment Act, which is better known as the GI Bill, was a landmark piece of legislation. It was designed to help World War II veterans smoothly reintegrate into civilian life. It fundamentally transformed American society by providing funds for higher education, home loans, and unemployment support. The GI Bill was specifically crafted to prevent a depression and avoid the mistreatment that veterans faced coming home after World War One. So it offered a comprehensive set of benefits. But the wide disparity in the implementation of the GI Bill was another major driver in the wealth, income, and education gaps between Black and white veterans. The language in the bill did not exclude Black veterans, but racist white politicians, especially in the South, did everything they could to ensure that Black veterans did not receive benefits. So in addition, let me share some of the history that was left out of our history books. Even before the Trump administration um, plans to erase Black history, we were taught in class that about Levittown. Okay, there were in fact six Levittowns. They were planned communities in several states that were built to provide affordable homes to returning World War II veterans. Three of them were actually named Levittowns. Okay. But what our books did not reveal was that the developer, William Levitt, was deeply racist and he refused to sell these homes to Black veterans. In fact, he wrote discriminatory and racial covenants into each deed to make sure Blacks could not buy homes in these communities. It wasn't until 1957 that a Black family purchased a home in Levittown, in a Levittown. Okay. William and Daisy Myers bought a second-hand home in Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's Levittown. William was a World War II veteran, a World War II Army veteran. Daisy was a school teacher. They had three young children at the time. The attacks began immediately. Okay, for days, People in that community gathered hundreds at a time outside their home in violent demonstrations. They formed a group called the Levittown Betterment Committee, dedicated to evicting the Myers and making Levittown all white once more. They met in a nearby home, which they dubbed the Confederate House, and the Confederate flag flew outside. Dixie was blasted on repeat from a record player. When the news went national, uh, the Quakers, the American Jewish Congress, and William Penn Center helped organize 24/7 citizen patrol. White couples volunteered to babysit the Myers children, and they helped clean up the damage from the attacks. Martin Luther King and other black civil rights leaders met with the families. They managed to stay 4 more years until William Myers got a job out of town in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, but their plight helped lead to the passage of the Fair Housing Act in 1968. Now, considering that housing wealth is nearly half of total household wealth for homeowners, Black veterans and their descendants were denied access to what is probably today billions in generational household wealth. Now let's move up to the housing crisis of 2008. Okay. The greatest early growth in Black home ownership occurred um, during the post-World War II boom, which is basically 1940 to 1960. Home ownership rates increased from 23% to 38%. The passage of the Fair Housing Act in 1968 provided legal protections against housing discrimination, and Black home ownership rate set at about 42% after that. Black home ownership reached the peak, the highest historical point of 49% in 2004, and that was driven by the housing boom. Many borrowers were subsequently targeted with subprime loans and predatory lending practices that were disproportionately directed at Black and Hispanic borrowers. Okay, that led to disproportionate losses. In 2006, for instance, 53% of Black homeowners assumed a subprime mortgage compared to 26% of white borrowers. So when the Great Recession hit, losses and foreclosures to uh, losses and foreclosures basically um, caused caused a dramatic drop in wealth. Okay, from from job losses and a loss of wealth for all Americans, but it was again disproportionately high among Black and Hispanic people. From 2005 to 2009, the median wealth fell by 53% in Black households versus 16% in white households, okay? Let me say that again. From 2005 to 2009, the median wealth fell by 53% in Black households versus 16% in white households. Okay. Um, so the effect of the housing downturn in 2008 continued to affect Black home ownership even today, where we're now at about 40%. We're at the lowest rate. We were at 2019, we were at the lowest rate since the signing of the Fair Housing Act of 1968. And that brings us to today. Okay. Um, the social justice protests during COVID, prompted by the death of George Floyd, resulted in boundless hope and billions in investments in the Black community that was promised by major corporations. As it turns out, most of these billions were empty promises. Corporations pledged almost 50 billion to racial equity. Only 1.7 billion was actually delivered. This was documented by the Washington Post. 90% of that 1.7 billion was loans, not grants. And then came Trump in the 2024 election. Okay. Meta eliminated its entire DEI team. Walmart ended $100 million commitment to DEI initiatives. Target dramatically scaled back its DEI commitments. Black folks are still boycotting Target. I could go on, but you've seen how corporate executives and college presidents cowered under the threats of the Trump administration. As one nonprofit leader said, these pledges were never investments. They were PR fire extinguishers. And then came Trump, Elon Musk, and Doge, who devastated black federal employees and contractors with their anti-DEI initiatives. Historically, federal workforce was provided professional opportunities for black folks and a pathway to achieve middle-class jobs. At a time when other avenues for black employment were shut due to racial segregation, the federal service was among the first national workforces to integrate. Okay, public sector jobs provide opportunities and stability for Black households, with safeguards against discrimination and in hiring and promotions. As a result, Black Americans have been overrepresented in the federal workforce when compared to the broader labor participation. About 19% of the federal workforce was Black in 2024, compared to about 14% of the overall population. Black employees made up to as much as one-third or more of the staff at some agencies, such as the Department of Education, Treasury, Housing and Urban Development. And in 14 states and Washington, D.C., Black Americans were at least 20% of the state's federal workforce. So the significance was you had benefits, job stability, upward mobility, equal up to opportunity, and it attracted thousands of black federal employees to service for generations. Okay, these career paths allowed black families to enter the middle class, purchase homes, send children to college, and prepare to retire with dignity. They were demolished by the haphazard cuts to the federal workforce fueled by Doge, and executive orders banning diversity, equity, inclusion. Uh, the cut sent shockwaves through the black workforce. In areas with heavy concentrations of black federal workers, some level of economic fallout is expected for both the families and the communities. Okay. In two of the wealthiest black counties in America, Prince George's and Charles County in Maryland, the pain is being felt acutely. The sweeping cuts across these public sector agencies have affected Black women in particular, as they have been disproportionately represented in agencies that have been hit the hardest. For thousands of these women being forced out of the federal government after spending their professional lives building a career, and now their families are being put at great financial risk. The impact is likely to be far-reaching as Black women make up the majority or made up the majority of Black federal workers and accounted for 12% of the federal workforce overall, almost double their representation in the general labor force. So, though it's difficult to track fully since the Trump administration has pulled down most of the publicly available demographic data, some reporting suggests that agencies with higher concentrations of women and black workers were the hardest hit. Not only do these job cuts have immediate negative consequences for black wealth, but they also reduce future potential retirement earnings. These are these actions in the public sector are occurring simultaneously with equally broad pressure campaign by Trump and his conservative allies within the private sector. Trump's executive orders imposed anti-DEI requirements on federal contractors, and threatened federal action against private sector organizations, which has led to the major retrenchment that I talked about earlier. Some employees have pulled back on initiatives for underrepresented groups that have helped Black middle class workers get ahead, such as training opportunities and mentoring. The results could be long lasting for Black workers, as research suggests, with strong diversity initiatives gone, Black professionals may face limited career development opportunities and less advancement. Black unemployment rose was um, it rose if in 2025 from 7.2% after the cut in July. And certain states saw even higher. So and the rates continue, unemployment rates for Black Americans continue to be high. In addition, federal pressure and policies against DEI have driven a sharp decline in Black student enrollment at highly selective universities, with top schools seeing drops of nearly half in some freshman classes. At the 50 most selective institutions, Black freshman enrollment has decreased significantly. Institutions like Harvard and Princeton experienced drops between 11 and nearly 50% since affirmative action was banned. So I begin I began this discussion with we've been here before. So here we are again. Years of economic gains for Black Americans in housing, employment, and wealth are being wiped away. How we in America respond after this 4 years of turmoil is over, if it is over in that time, will define how well we recover for the next generation and how well will we recover? Well, that, my friends, I'm going to leave for the next discussion. But I want to thank you for tuning in and listening, and then I'll turn it back over to the host for questions. You're on
I'm
mute.
muted. Of course, I'm still muted. I was about to say I've given you all the ability to turn on your mics and your cameras, so you can ask your question if you want. But Don Owens has a question that I will read to you since you put it in the chat. He said, Mr. Brooks, in your book, The Rise and Fall of the Freedmen's Savings Bank, you talk about financial capability. You also mentioned in the book that increasing financial capability is a noble goal, but a lack of financial capability alone did not cause wealth inequality. If anything, wealthy people need to reckon with how they made their fortunes and who they exploited along the way. Could you expand on what that looks like?
Well, you know, one of the quick fixes for the problems facing Black folks is increased financial education. And and many of the Black scholars have come out and say that that in itself is racist. I mean, just learning a little bit about finances is not going to get us out of this situation with the wealth inequities. What we have to have is programs that are funded by corporations and the government that will put money, and I'm going to focus again on housing, put Black folks in houses that they own. Okay. It is not something that we can do by ourselves. It's not something, we have great programs that attempt to get Black folks into housing. But we have such a huge issue that it's going to take a very large scale. We're going to have to see basically government money allotted to specific goals on housing, and we can we corporations can't escape the blame. Okay, they were part of this. So yes, I'm saying that would have to come from major corporations and state and federal government because they were all complicit in the discrimination that has resulted in the wealth disparities and the housing gaps.
Any other questions from our audience? If you have a question, just raise your hand and I'll call on you and we can have you speak. But if not, I will just make a statement that, you mentioned getting support. Uh, Sorry, I'm trying to keep up with my window here.
Mhm.
Um, I noticed that I talk about DC government since we're here on the DC government program. But I talk about in the presentation I make about self-determination in DC, about how when DC government was first started under Walter Washington, they sought to implement self-determination programs, or at least programs and create agencies to support economic development in the community. And like the Small Business Development Agency and other agencies that kind of give support to business owners in general. Of course, it supported Black people because the majority of people here are Black. But do you think those types of programs or bringing those types of programs back would help solve some of what you were discussing?
Yes, and actually DC did announce a program to get basically people increase home ownership. Mayor Bowser had an initiative that I believe was announced like 4 years ago. Um, and and these programs have been successful. I mean, there are cities that have done programs to increase the basic, but saying is the impact is going to be liberal, is going to be somewhat limited, okay? Because one, city budgets, especially with the Trump budget cut, um, are people trying to even state governments are trying to balance budgets. So, okay, so who is it that we have to call on? We need to basically make these corporations step up, okay? And step up and not with these empty promises that they came up with after George Floyd was murdered, but some realistic some things that are going to have an impact, okay? And um that are going to get more Black folks into houses, and is going to have an impact on long-term generational wealth for Black Americans.
So we have another question from Dennis Hansford. He asked, do you think the recently floated idea of taxing AI companies is a viable way forward?
In theory, um, you know, yes, in theory, because the tech companies were the first. Okay, I have to say, the tech companies were the first to retreat. It didn't take much for them to start. I mean, they were the last to initiate DEI programs, and they were the first to retreat. Did not take much for them to come out and actually come out and basically disassemble those programs that they had just recently created. Now, and I say in theory because all of this money is being pumped um, into AI, and if we could find a way to make them set aside money that would help with this initiatives, it would be great. Now, why I said in theory is because in this administration, it's not going to happen. Okay, so all we could do is try to extract that from the state and local governments when they're trying to build these data centers, right? And notice where they're building them. They're building them out in these rural areas, and they are being opposed, very strongly opposed, because of the energy drainage and the water policy. So yes, if we can use the fact that they are extremely unpopular as a way to extract not just promises, but we need to put it in writing. We need to hold them accountable for anything that they say they're going to do. We need to make sure that they do it. We need to make sure that they do it. We need to make sure that they do it. We need to make sure that they do it. We need to make sure that they do it. We need to make sure that they do it. We need to make sure that they do it. We need to make sure that they do it. We need to make sure that they do it. We need to make sure that they do it. We need to make sure that they do it. We need to make sure that they do it. We need to make sure that they do it. We need to make sure that they do it. We need to make sure that they do it. We need to make sure that they do it. We need to make sure that they do it. We need to make sure that they do it. We need to make sure that they do it. We need to make sure that they do it. We need to make sure that they do it. We need to make sure that they do it. We need to make sure that they do it. We need to make sure that they do it. We need to make sure that they do it. We need to make sure that they do it. We need to make sure that they do it. We need to make sure that they do it. We need to make sure that they do it. We need to make sure that they do it. We need to make sure that they do it. We need to make sure that they do it. We need to make sure that they do it. We need to make sure that they do it. We need to make sure
Very true. I was going to say good luck. But- so we do have another question. Now, this person has your name, so I'm not sure who this is, but it says, how does unitification Africans and Africans in America play a role in our overall economic development? And then there's a second question. What about cryptocurrency as a viable means of investment? Now, I'll just say before you go there that cryptocurrency is extremely volatile. And so I would say we need a little something a little more stable than that.
Well, you took the word right out of my mouth, though. It's actually cryptocurrency is being embraced by young black men more than older, and they may be more comfortable, but it is still fairly volatile. And I would just say that if this is the time to extract concessions from any company that's trying to grow right now. So crypto, in that sense, okay, not as an investment, I'm saying not investing in your own retirement, but extract promises and extract real concessions from the companies that are profiting from cryptocurrencies rise. And that would make a big impact. Now, on joint ventures with Africa, right at this point, I think both Africa and African Americans um, are say basically being ignored, not just ignored, but basically I think this is a time if it's a time when we can actually talk about relationship building, but and it actually maybe this what's happening in the world and what's happening here may make sense for us to actually um, talk more and get together and talk about. And I think there are some basically initiatives to do that. And but I can't be specific. I just think it is a time when all of us can learn and basically help each other because we're all on the outs right now for at least until the next election.
Yeah, I think coalition building has always been a positive. That's what when I teach history, I always point to, I say, look at what was successful. People came together to build, you know. Divide and conquer is very successful. And so when people understand that, we have these commonalities and we need to work together collectively, that's how we move forward. I think that that is very powerful. And I've seen, social media tends to work against that, if that makes sense. In a lot of places, I think that's one of the things that we need to, I know it wasn't asked of me, but I think
No,
that we need to,
no, right.
come together and do coalition building. Because that's where the success comes in. Because I do point back to DC government when they were first building it before the devastation of the 80s and the crack epidemic and all that came in when they were building the government. It was about building coalitions and bringing people together to go forward so that they weren't competing against one another, that they were working together for the betterment of all. And I know that's really hard to do because, in a capitalist state, there are always haves and have nots, and that's what we live in. But there is space for coalition building.
And let me add to that, Lopez, that coalition building, okay, not just across the oceans, but
Look,
but many of the groups that help get us where we are have lost their relevance, and we need to reform those coalitions, these black organizations, um, this and adding in the sororities and the fraternities, to make a statement. You know, it's like when Florida, basically when people realized what was happening in Florida with the racism with the DeSantis, um, that was a um, that was a it was a fraternity that basically canceled a convention there, and probably lost money doing so. And those are the kinds of coalitions. I mean, I would have loved to see more and more organizations basically say, yes, that's the best what we're doing. And so I think we need to go back to basically our some of our older organizations, um, basically creating coalitions with some of the newer, younger ones.
It's a good point. Dennis mentioned the wealthy have played black and white workers against each other time and time again. And I think about Bacon's Rebellion in Virginia and how black and white workers came together to fight for a goal. Then it collapsed. And then after that, well, let's work to keep these two groups separate. So,
Well,
now
but
the,
but the other thing is Trump's base is the group that should be a coalition with black workers, but
yeah.
they they aren't because they can't see what he's doing to them. And basically, to them, it looks like he's just, I think they want to see what he has done to black folks. And it's, it's about the old thing, biting off your nose to spite your face. I mean, they're probably suffering the most in during this administration, but those are the people who voted for him. You were going to add something?
Oh, I was just gonna say, well, that's just the success of propaganda,
Yes,
which
yes,
has worked, which works very well.
yes,
Propaganda does work
right, yes.
very, very, very well. But the other Rodney Brooks says, should we continue to follow the capitalistic model for our economic development or seek alternatives?
Uh, um, it's it's all about um it's all about who is in charge, okay? So if who is to say if we have an alternative because in the alternatives that you've seen in foreign countries, it has been it still has had the same result. People, um, the result has been that has not been positive. Okay, now, you can go back and look at places like Cuba where, um, and places like that, but you have to go back too far in history, I think, to see a successful alternative. And I don't know that Black Americans are going to buy into anything other, I think a combination of socialism and democracy. I mean, the hybrids. But no, I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think that is something that we're going to see here. Even though now we're seeing what people are saying, as close to someone thinking they're God right now. But um, I think still democracy eventually is going to work. But no, I don't think because even in other where you talk about socialism and communism, the um, the people at the bottom are still suffering. So I think we just need to figure out how how we make the people who should pay to make up for, okay, and I'm going to use the bad word reparations, but yes, we still need to demand reparations, um, and that that would that would basically solve the racial wealth gap issue. reparations. Okay.
It's very interesting listening to what you were saying, and that it'd be a combination of different styles of economies and governments, because that has worked and it has incrementally moved society forward. But it seems like as you move forward, as you develop, people tend to become comfortable and then they forget to keep their eye on the ball and things start to slide backward. Like I talk about the Glass-Steagall Act and how that was systematically dismantled over 60 years. And when people you're watching, it's chop, chop, chip, 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 chip away. And I wonder what it would take to get people to really stay focused and protect the things that help them and help society move forward. Because it's very interesting watching that
Hmm.
be chipped away at as we watch other things be chipped away at, like the Voting Rights Act, like other acts that were in place to kind of protect against people
Housing
being
Act.
exploited. Yeah, the Housing Act, and to protect against people being exploited, and how those things get slowly chipped away and then all of a sudden they're gone. And you're like, wait, how did we get here? Uh, Thanks for coming, Dennis. I see you said I have another meeting and I have to go, but thank you for coming and we appreciate your questions. We're actually at 6:56, so our program is about to come to an end too. So I want to thank everybody for coming. If we have one more question from the audience, let us know. If not, we will bring this in for a landing. And thank you for joining us. So I'll give it a minute. And if not, I will. Well, all righty. Oh, thank you, Arlene Jones. I recognize that name. Thank you for coming. Well, thank you all for coming, joining us for this conversation. One of the things that I want people to leave with is understanding that, it's not all negative, not all bad, and that there have been positive developments. There has been progress. Like one of the things that I point out when I teach Black history is that, by the 1980s, over 50% of Black people were out of poverty. And that was the first time that that had happened in American history. That progress has been made and progress can still be made. We just have to be proactive in spotting when things are being chipped away, building these coalitions, and just keep your eye on the ball and understanding new technology and new ways to reach people because social media is here and it's here to stay. And I'm on it, I watch it. My TikTok is full of foolishness because I try not to be serious. But
Okay.
I see the conversation. I'm not on X anymore, but we have an X for the archives. And sometimes I look and some of the things I see, I'm like, wow, it's very subtle, but you see the negativity out there. So I tell people, keep your eye on the ball. Sure. And remember that we are all in this together. So thank you, Mr. Brooks, for
All
your
right.
lecture tonight. And thank you all for coming. And if you don't visit us at archives.dc.gov, that is our digital archive. We're going to put up a whole bunch of pictures, going to put up a listing of those who got their freedom under the Compensated Emancipation Act. We have birth records, death records online that you can search. We're working our way through them for free, so you can see them for free. No pay, for free. So check us out, and thanks for coming. And keep your eye on our page for more programming. So thank you all, and have a great night.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, thank you. Good night, everybody.
Good night.